dancers, et puis voilà,
Ah oui. Ah, perché te l'avevo messo l'altra volta, no?
No, per mettere sul computer poi se no sposto.
Ma se no la posso...
Ti devo solo mandare il testo, cioè prima
des components Ludovica.
Sì, sì, ma vado solo, non voglio partire da solo.
Tu sais comment faire ça? Juste maintenant. Je ne vais pas juste maintenant.
Quoi?
Sans te détruire. Ok. Alors, benvenuto a tutti. Welcome to all to this last workshop of the semester. We had a series of meetings, as you all know, on play and games and patrimony. The last one, and there will be a connection with the last one. The last one we had in A1 was about this question of finding material relating to board games, so dice, token, knuckle bones, and the tables themselves, the board games themselves. And we continue in this line, this time, enlarging, widening the horizon, and questioning also what is this cultural patrimony, especially in South Italy, and South Italy being one of the places where we know there is so much to do and so much to publish and to study together. And we are very happy to welcome Raffaella Cassano and Luigi La Rocca, who will speak about this marvelous patrimony from South Italy. For those who don't know yet well the project, just a few words to say what it is about. First, you must know that we started with an exhibition that took place in Switzerland first, with the support of the Swiss National Foundation. Salvatore, peut-être mettre oui, parce que Madame Cassano est derrière toi.
Oui,
and it went on in France and in Germany, also in Nuremberg. There was a part of Spiel mit der Antike, a reception of antiquity. It was always a very interactive exhibition with, you will see things to do for children, for grown-ups, such as the image of a game on the floor, so that we go across the showcase. Making movies as well, reconstructing movements, dynamics of games, and having many open day events. And now we have this project. And this project has three parts. One is collecting written sources, and now we are achieving the end of this first part as planned. So the publication of Pollux and Children Games with Salvatore Costanza, with Marco Vespa reconstructing this heritage thanks to an anthology of text. So this will be not only published but also online, and thinking together about the function of play, games and education. Then there is this archaeological part, very important one, Locus, Ludi, comparing Roman towns, east and west. And that's why Alessandro Pace is not with us today, because he's in Pompeii, and he's in Pompeii collecting material. But Thomas Dagno is collecting the same for Roman board, and we will compare. Think also about games in liminal places. This we will start to do today, and we will continue for the next year. Why do we find games in tombs and in sanctuaries also? Does it have to do with rites of passage, and in tombs what does it have to do? And all this is connected, and of course connected with iconography. And it's where of course South Italian past painting is so important. It is fully part of the project as well. How play is part of the construction of social identity in visual record. There is a thesis by Hannah Amar on children as social actors, on children of the so-called Koe of Antesteria, And we discuss a lot about games and the fabric of gender, and Alexandra Atia has arrived to work as well on Italian Basque paintings. One question is, of course, recording these games. There are depictions. Sometimes they do give a hint to what is actually the play, and Ulrich Schädler will continue on this 5 lines. I have a question also about South Italy. Don't you have in Greek cities of South Italy things like that and on the floor? That's a question that we have. Huh?
Never seen.
Never seen. We discuss that because that's very interesting. This is what Thomas has in Avanches, so a beautiful stone with Alia games, or Roman period, it's more Roman period. And this is the kind of thing that Ulrich Schädler has recorded in Ephesus, for instance, but we will return to this. But some temples are full of them, as in Didyma. And just to show you what we are aiming to do now, it is a topography database, a database where we record on the Google for a Google map all these games carved on the floor, or as board games, as a stone, and to try to understand if there is any distribution related to chronology, to geography, so that it's a tool for all of us to work on. And this is a picture taken on the Acropolis in the Parthenon, because the Parthenon is full of games on the floor. What we will discover today, so are those that are made, and I just show you. Ulrich will come back to that, but you know the one in the Kerameikos, and also in the National Museum from Bari, in the National Museum. This is the new one from Brauron. And what you must know, and I will conclude with that, is that we are starting animation and construction of these games, thanks to Ulrich, who is producing an e-book, giving rules, giving explanation, how we reach that, with informaticians in Vienna. And very soon you will be able to play it online. And this will be offered to museums as well. I mean, anybody who is interested to work with it for animation, for mediation in schools as well, or at university, because it's also a tool to think about. So this is being imposed. And another work is republication of Les Jeux des Anciens, 1869. So it is 150 years ago. And that's the image I have put on here, because we are trying to find these pictures, where do they come from, these engravings. And Alexandra Atia will speak about it. And my very next slide is about the opening of the exhibition in Lyon, Jouer dans l'Antiquité ludique, which will take place on the 29th of June. And you are, of course, all invited.
19 June.
Yes, June. No, je sais. June. All invited to join. But now we will pass to Ulrich, who will go on, and so this was also the children, who will now present what has been said in the last session. I think it's especially important for Stine, because we had a lot about one wooden board game, and we had a lot of discussion also. Tu commences par Proprad, l'un à l'autre?
Est-ce que c'est pas le bon fichier?
Si, c'est bon, c'est celui que j'ai pris.
Ah,
je n'ai pas pris un autre.
Non, je peux prendre ça. J'ai encore un autre qui est un peu mieux, mais...
C'est celui qui est là.
Est-ce que tu as...
Non, je veux pas les connecter. Et puis c'est le keynote, peut-être. It's the keynote one.
Yeah, this one.
Okay, so Ulrich Schädler is the director of the Swiss Museum of Games. So a great specialist, and he's the one who can tell us, this is a game. No, this is not a game. This is an ornament. You can do nothing with it. So very, very important. And si tu veux faire quelque chose avec Keynote, on a beaucoup.
No, it doesn't work.
Okay.
If you don't have Keynote here.
Non. On reprend le PowerPoint. On reprend le PowerPoint. Marcher. And so he will present the two parts we had last time. One on the wooden game of Vimose in Denmark, because in Denmark they have not only bodies, but there are also games, because there is a legionary camp that preserve the full, Donc tu te trouves, je reprends par votre
Okay, I will talk about, some of you know already these two game boards I will talk about today. One has been found in a grave, recently in a grave dating to the 4th century AD in Poprad. This is near the High Tatra in Slovakia. It comes from a robbed princely grave of a young man. We are in the process of publishing the grave. The publication will appear next year in 4 volumes. And I was asked to study the game board that has been found in the grave, because it's as a matter of fact, it's the best preserved ancient game board north of the Alps. It's nearly complete. It's relatively small, made of wood, entirely made of wood in one piece, just one piece of wood. It has a raised rim, and on one side a very precisely drawn grid of 17 by probably 15 squares. So the squares are not perfectly square, but slightly rectangular. We know from analysis of the grave has been robbed in antiquity already. So most part of the grave goods is not there anymore. But fortunately, what has been found is still a gold coin, a solidus from Valens of the year, minted in the year 375, which has been transformed into an amulet. So we have to do with a young man from a very obviously important family of probably the Vandals. That's the region where the Vandals lived at the time. And what analysis of the teeth have revealed is the fact that this young man lived for a very long. It was an indigenous, so genetically it is clear that he was from the region, but he lived for a long time, obviously, in the Mediterranean. So he had obviously very good contacts to Rome, or the Roman Empire. The idea is that he was practically one of these part of this Roman method of hostages. You know, they took the children from the leading families from Germanic tribes, and they took them to Rome and raised them in Roman families to send them back once they were adults, and this is the case here, very likely. The whole grave, I don't have images in this slide. I have images of the grave in the keynote presentation. The whole the grave already, the construction of the wooden grave. It's a big grave chamber made of wood, very solidly made. Also the construction is not indigenous but Roman. It's typical for Roman construction or Roman woodwork. So he came back with probably with a whole group of people from the Mediterranean, and but then unfortunately he died of hepatitis B. Well, as I said, the game board is the best preserved game board, ancient game board north of the Alps. The two game boards I talked today are the reason why I present these two game boards to you today is the fact that Stine Schierup from Copenhagen is here, because the best comparisons to these boards I have are in Copenhagen, in both cases. So it is important that we collaborate concerning these finds. So this is a relatively small board like this, made in one piece. This is a difference, for example, to the boards from the Limose in Denmark. There, the raised rim is made separately, and the board is fits into these pieces. Another difference is that this board here is just one-sided. There's just on one side there is a grid, the other side is empty, as you see here. What you also see is that there's just this part is missing, and we'll come back to this detail later. But first of all, we will look at the grid. The grid is very precisely drawn with cut with an instrument in straight lines. So with the help of an instrument, it is possible that they have here traces, and it is possible that they marked out the places where the lines had to be cut before cutting these lines, and they were cut in this direction because they cut also the wood in a certain way, so we know exactly how it was made. You see here the slightly raised rim, but everything is made out of one piece of wood. The state of the board is makes it a little bit difficult to determine precisely the number of squares. So we know exactly, we have on in one direction we have exactly 17 squares. This is clear. In the other direction, it is difficult to determine. The board, the surface is partly worn. You see in this part here, and so it is difficult to determine the transversal lines. Here it is relatively easy to see, but here it is not very easy. This is why we cannot be 100% sure whether or not there were 15 or 16 squares in the other direction. 6 glass gaming counters were also found together with the board. 5 black ones. One of these 5 black ones is a little larger than the other 4, and 1 white piece, but which is also a little larger. So it has practically the same dimensions as the larger black one. Analyses of the glass paste have shown that also these pieces come from somewhere from the Roman Empire. So this is very typical. We have a lot of these glass counters also in Germanic graves, and they are all obviously imported glass counters. We know these glass counters since a long time. They already we know them from Greek contexts already. In Hellenistic times, for example, they are very often used in Roman times, and especially in military contexts. This is, for example, an example from a grave in Poland. So these glass counters were very popular, especially among the Germanic elite. where you find these glass counters in various colors in the graves. I indicated to you this tiny little part of the board that is not preserved, and it looks to me as if there was originally perhaps a bronze handle here that has been broken and taken away by the rave robbers, because there are several boards or traces of game boards around with bronze handles. This is, for example, in Alton in England, where you have the bronze corners. We have in several graves we have traces of game boards, but the board, the wood is normally not preserved or not entirely preserved, or just tiny little pieces preserved. But sometimes we have the metal hinges, for example, or the corners, as you see here in Alton, and there is this bronze handle. This is another example. This is from Stine, where you see here the metal corners, the hinges that determine exactly the size of the board, and the glass counters on top of it. This is Gommern, another Germanic grave, also with traces of a game board with a bronze handle. So very often there are bronze handles. In many cases, also in Germanic graves, for example, you find bronze handles, and they are usually interpreted as kista handles, so handles for small boxes or something like that. But I think in some cases one might also think of a game board. This is, for example, obviously the case here in Neudorf-Bornstein. This is another grave find with gaming counters, glass gaming counters, and we have traces of three boards. It's not necessarily game boards; could also be a tray, for example, something like that. Here you have the four corners of this board here. Here are still two corners of a board that is here, and then you have a line of counters that indicate that these counters were obviously not placed on this board here, but placed on another one, which lay on top of it, and here you find also a bronze handle. So very likely there was a third board here with the bronze handle. And then you have, of course, Leuna in the eastern part of Germany, where also glass counters have been found, black and white ones. This is a photography of the original finding during the excavation I got from the colleagues in the Landesmuseum in Halle. And this is the reconstruction of the position of the counters on the board. You see they have been aligned, 3 black, 3 white, 3 black, 3 white, without any connection to a game. This is just ornamental. It is important to know that whenever we find pieces on the board, this does not necessarily mean that the pieces have been placed with regard to a game that is played on the board, but sometimes maybe just in an ornamental setting. What is important in Leuna is that they have found a tiny little fragment with the wood attached, because there is this ornament inlaid in gold, which made that the wood underneath was obviously preserved. And on the back side of this ornament there are traces of squares, still the lines of squares, so that we can be fairly sure that the board in Leuna had 13 squares on one side, at least on one side, and perhaps 13 also on the other, 13 by 13 squares. And you see this 13 by 13 squares, this has nothing to do with the number of counters here. This ornament is very interesting. It is a half petal, a half rosette, let's say, six-petaled, the half of a six-petaled rosette. And this is an ornament we find frequently on duodecim scripta alea boards. For example, here 2 examples from Turkey. This one in Aphrodisias, here in Ephesus. I could show several other examples, so it is clear from this ornament, the backside with the squares, that in Leuna we had a double-sided game board, squares on a grid of squares on one side, and a duodecim scripta alea on the other side. So clearly a Roman game. Now another important find, of course, is from Vimose in Denmark. It seems that there are 4 fragments that have been found. It is not really sure.
I will describe all of them.
Yeah, we will describe all of them. They are all also, as in Leuna, double-sided with the duodecim scripta alea on one side and a grid on the other side. These are the drawings from the publication from the 19th century. This is a photograph that you can find on the website of the museum, which obviously shows the back side, the other side of this fragment here. So this is also a double-sided, but you will talk about it later. So we have double-sided game boards with a grid on one side and duodecim scripta alea on the other side. And this is not the case in Poprad. So in Poprad, as you saw, it's just a grid on one side of the board. Yeah, this is also to show that the fragments from in Copenhagen, they are linked to Roman game boards. We know. Okay, this is the first thing. The second was the gaming table in about 2 years ago, the Swiss Museum of Games was able to purchase a gaming table, a terracotta, Greek terracotta gaming table on an auction in London. And this table has, there are 5 of these tables around, 2 in Athens, 1 in Brauron, this one, and the 5th one in Copenhagen. This is the table is made of terracotta and has 11 parallel lines ending in small circles, and the central line is marked out by a circle in the middle. This is the one from Bari in the National Museum in Athens that has 5 lines, 5 parallel lines ending in circles, and with statuettes of mourners in the corner. So this has been found in the context in a burial. Of course, the mourners, the statuettes of the mourners, they also indicate that this table has been made because they are fixed on the table, on the table. So this table has been made for to be placed in a grave. This is not just a gaming table that has been later used as a grave good, but it has been made as a grave good. The same, probably the same holds true for the one from the Keramaikos. Also, this one has been found in the context of a burial, and it has 4 statuettes of mourners that the colleagues in the Keramaikos place on top of the board. They are distinct, so they are not fixed on the table. But as you see, the surface of the table is not really very well preserved. The one in that resembles closely the one in the Swiss Museum of Games is this one in the museum in Brauron. It has been found in the 50s, also in grave context. It is labeled in the museum as an offering table, but it is not an offering table, it is a game board. It has 11 parallel lines ending in circles, in the same way as the board in the Swiss Museum of Games, and it is very similar in all over in the making, in the black figure ornaments that point to around 600 BC, the typical animal style, early black figure animal style in Athens. We are about to study this more closely together with Maria Schierup in the museum in Athens. And this is one that is very relatively well known in Copenhagen. This is obviously a model of a table because there are two dice also fixed on the surface, and also the pawns, the counters, at both ends of 9 parallel lines in this case. It was Breitenstein who published the table. There is another trace here in the middle, a square that points to something that was on top of the board, but not in the same way oriented as the dice, but in 45 degrees difference. And the early excavators, they thought that there was a third die on the board, and that with 3 dice making 18 points, the aim of the game was to occupy all the 18 points on both sides of the lines. So you roll the dice, and according to the number you rolled, you put counters on the ends of the lines. This is of course not possible. This is we know of no game that is played like this. This is also a variant of the famous 5 lines game, which has obviously been played on boards with several numbers of lines. This is again the one in the Swiss Museum of Games. You see the surface with the 11 parallel lines ending in circles, and the central line indicated especially. And this is just a comparison between the table in the museum on the right side and the table in Brauron on the left. And this is a comparison between the table in the museum and the table in Copenhagen on the right, which is also very similar in the making. That obviously makes one might even think that they come from the same workshop. They are very, very similar in many details. So, but this has to be studied. The game that is represented here is most likely variants of the famous game of 5 lines described by Pollux and other sources. There are several boards around, also scratched in the marble floors in Greece. This is, for example, from the Temple of Leto in Delos, on the island of Delos, and there are several ways to draw these boards with 5 lines. You can have just 5 parallel lines. You see the little grooves at the ends of the line where you put the counters. Sometimes you have just 2 rows of 5 little grooves. Here you have 5 lines with the central line here in the middle, dividing the board into 2 parts, and this is an unfinished board with only 4 lines. And this is another one that is on the other side of the temple. So there are several of these boards on the temple, and we think that this is the game that is played by the heroes Ajax and Achilles, because in Brussels there is a Kiatos preserved. This is the only one among more than 160 representations of the scene that shows, as a matter of fact, shows this board with 5 parallel lines, and at both ends of the lines there is a counter, placed a counter. So at least here it is clear that it was thought that the heroes Ajax and Achilles played this game. And of course now we can think about the relation why then because all these teens, they are found on vases, black figure vases in essence, that normally come from graves. On Lekitoi and other vases that normally have been found in graves. The famous Exekias vase also comes from a grave in Vulci in Etruria. So, but Véronique has already, there are several articles published about this subject, from myself also, from Véronique also, to explain what the idea may be behind this representation and the fact that that the people put these vases with these representations into the grave. It is. It seems that, let's say, during the first half of the 6th century, roughly speaking, there was this the custom or a possibility to put a real board or a model of the 5 lines game into the grave, and from the middle of the 6th century onwards, they put vases with this representation in the graves instead of these terracotta gaming tables. But obviously the same game is meant. And so we have this this link between the 5 lines and the grave goods. So I will not discuss now. There are many of these representations. What is important is that the game also travels to Etruria. We have mirrors, Etruscan mirrors, one in Milano and another one in London, where you see also Ajax and Achilles playing the game on a board with 7 lines. There are 2 dice, and at both ends of the lines there are the counters. So this is typically the same type of game. So we have 5 lines, 7 lines, 9 lines, and again 11. This was a 5 lines game here that has at the second time somebody has added lines to make it 11. And a famous representation of such a board is to be found in the Tomba dei Rilievi in Cerveteri. One of the reliefs in the graves shows a giant game board with a raised rim again, 2 bronze handles, and a little bag for the counters. And here there are also 11 lines scratched on the board. So I think I stop here. This is enough just to show you 2 recent examples of game boards that were not known 10 years ago, that are in context, have been found in context with graves. We do not know, of course, where the table that the museum acquired in the auction comes from, but it is very likely that this also comes from a grave. Otherwise, it would not be so well preserved. And the other 4 tables all come from burial context. So I think that also the table in the Swiss Museum of Games must also come from a funerary context. So we can discuss all this later when we know a little better the finds in Copenhagen.
Thank you for this rich conference about the presence of ludic material in funerary context. And we can now open the discussions. Are there any questions about the presentation?
We could say we can ask direct questions to what has been said, and then we can have a larger discussion after Stine.
Yeah.
And go back to this. If it was very clear. Then we go on with Stine. So you will have understood that we are very, very happy to welcome her. Your material is very, very important to us, and we're very happy to share it with us. So Stine Schierup is curator of antiquities in the National Museum of Copenhagen. She's also a specialist of Italian vase painting, so it's very coherent to be here and to meet our guests as well. And so we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm really not a specialist in board games, so I think this is a really interesting opportunity for me to be here. I'm been very inspired talking to you about this project. It sounds really, really interesting. And it's also an opportunity for us to learn more about what we have in Copenhagen. So, as I said, I'm not a specialist in board games, but I have looked a little into our collection, and I will present what we have at this point that might be interesting to the project. And I will do it kind of in a very straightforward manner, just let you know what we got, and then I hope that we can, in the discussion, we might have some interesting comments to this material. And I will maybe cut down a bit because you already presented a lot of the discussions relevant for the Terracotta table. And then, so I will have main focus on the Terracotta model and on the boards from Vimose. But preparing this presentation, I became aware that we also have some board games from Hama in Syria. So I will just very briefly show you this material. And also I have a few other things that I'm very eager to hear your opinion about. So first we begin in Syria. And Hama is a tell, like a city mound, and it lies, it's really bad map, but it's, you see it up here, it's right by the Orontes River in the western part of Syria. And Hama is, as I said, a tell. It's an artificial created city mound created through thousands and thousands of years of being inhabited by. And it was inhabited from the Stone Age period and was left at the end of the Iron Age due to the city was destroyed when it was still in part of the Assyrian Empire. And then it was inhabited again from the Hellenistic period and up until around 1500. The site was excavated by a group of Danish archaeologists in the 1930s. And therefore we have actually quite a significant collection in Copenhagen from this site. And among these finds we have this piece of ivory, game board, made up of different pieces of ivory. Some are longer and some are shorter and more square. They have, I think, been attached maybe to some kind of wooden box. And also there are different type of game pieces. These, the ones shown here, are not found together with this board, but they are shown here in the exhibition. And the other one is this one. Oh, sorry, this one belongs to the Iron Age period. So we are from around 1200 to 700 BC. And the other, what I presume is a board, is this one, made of limestone. It is dated to the Hama J period, which is in the Bronze Age, and around 2000 BC. It was found, well, it's not really difficult to see up here, but it was found in this area over here, which is in the, in the urban part of the Bronze Age building. And it is made of limestone, and it has these 3 times 10s, like holes, and in front of this, these two, I presume they might have been used for game pieces. And then it has this larger, the version that I have no idea what that would be, but maybe you have some. And the 10 times 3 kind of selection reminds me of these Zenit game boards from Egypt, and it might be related to this. Yes. And now we come to this the terracotta miniature table from our collection. As have already been said, this is now in Copenhagen, and the table, unfortunately, we have no knowledge of its original context, but we know that it was bought in Athens, actually by Ussing, a Danish professor in classical archaeology in the 19th century, and he bought this board game in Athens in 1882 from Athanasios Rousopoulos, who was a professor also in archaeology, was also known for dealing with antiquities, and there are quite a significant amount of antiquities distributed by him in this period. The material in Copenhagen was selected from his private collection, and unfortunately we have no knowledge exactly of why these things were selected or if they were related. But this is part of a larger group of objects that came from this collection. And as we talked about yesterday, it could be interesting to try to go further into seeing if there are any relations in this material. The board was first published rather recently after it came to Copenhagen in 1884 by Ussing in a small publication describing some new acquisitions to the collections in Copenhagen. And these paintings here are from this, or illustrations are from this first publication of the board. Yes, and the board is restored from actually quite a significant number of fragments, and there are parts of the board that is reconstructed in plaster. It's small fragments of it. So, as we will see later, this means that somewhat might appear like a whole board is not really as old. But I just remember, I forgot to say here, the length of the board is 37 centimeters, and the width is 12 centimeters, and the height is about 14.1 centimeters. So it has a more rectangular shape than the ones from the Swiss Museum of Games and the one from Fribourg. So, yeah. Now we will try and look at it from each side. And as I said before, some of it is restored in plaster, and this includes this piece right here, as you might see. And this means that even though it seems as if these two lines has no oval shape rise, it is. Oh, thank you. This is actually not the case. It's simply just restored, and the line has been continued. Yeah. But anyways, the board consists, as I said, of a rectangular shape, and we have on each end of them these dices, which both show a 6 on top of it. And then we have these 9 lines, which are all ending in these oval shape, presumably game pieces. As you can see here, it has originally been covered by this black slip, and in this way it kind of reminds of the ones in the brown, and because it has also
in Bari from Bari, incised and painted.
Okay. So one piece is missing here, but it's clear that it used to be there. And then we have, as it's already been said, we have this indication of something having been attached to the middle of the table. And as Ulrik already described, this has been suggested that it was also a dice, but it has also been suggested that it might be a mortar like we see on the table from Calaboose and Véronique. And as I understand it, it is thought that the players of the game would sit on each end of the the short end of the game table. Yes. The table is decorated in a black figure and dates on this background also to the early 6th century, as we have already talked about. And the decoration consists of these birds. We have 3 birds, all with their heads in the same direction, and we have these small filling ornaments of rosettes. The side of the table has these vertical lines, and yeah, actually the decoration is quite repeated. If we see the other side, it is very, it's much more fragmentary than the other one, but even though you can see these parts are also restored. But it is clear that we have also had these birds on this side, presumably also 3 birds on each side. Also, the side has these rectangular holes, which is similar to the ones in the wood that we already saw. Yes, and the short end this is like the only one that kind of breaks the patterns of these very aligned birds, because this is also birds, but unlike the other ones, they look kind of back. And both short ends have these large rosettes below. Yeah, this is the other one, where you can see the birds are like the one on the long sides, but contrast to the one on the other short end. Yeah. I will not go so much into this because we already talked about it, but of course there are some very clear parallels to the Copenhagen table and the ones here in the Swiss Museum of Games. And on this background, of course, even though we do not have any secure context information on the Copenhagen table, it can of course be related to this group of tables. And then I have not seen the Swiss Museum of Games table in real life, but I just noticed that this bird is very similar to the one on the Copenhagen table. So seen here in the photograph, the drawing from the 19th century, and then this is the one in the Swiss Museum of Games.
Yeah, this is really
Yes, and yeah, I refer here completely to this article because the interpretation of the Copenhagen game as being this a variant of this 5-line games, and I don't think there's no reason to talk more about this now because we just yeah. And when I was preparing for this presentation, I kind of found this very interesting dice in our storeroom. It is very big. It's considerably larger than a normal dice. It's about 4.5 centimeter on each side, and it has these rather deep depressions of different Greek letters. And I have not. It was discussed very briefly, or shown very briefly in this article, where there is also discussed the game tables in Epidaurus, but it is not from Epidaurus. This dice, again, unfortunately, is one of the pieces that we don't have any secure context information for. We know that it was bought in Athens by the Danish architect Christian Hansen, who was in Athens in the first part of the 19th century, and that it was given by him together with a group of other objects to the Danish king Christian VIII, and therefore entered his collection, and that's why we have this number. It refers to the Christian VIII collection of antiquities. And then, of course, later it came into the National Museum when it was established in 1851. So we don't have any information on it, and I myself have not seen anything similar to this. So I'm just very curious to hear if anybody here has some suggestion to this type of dice. What was the function of it? Can it be related to gaming, or is it more supposedly maybe related to some kind of cultic activities? So we can talk about that later, maybe. I hope. Yeah. And then now we turn to Denmark, or the Danish region, and the VMO board. And yeah, I will just very briefly talk a little about the situation of what is today Denmark. I mean, this is this area, and the context to the Roman Empire, because it's very clear that here we have the borders of the Roman Empire. And Denmark, of course, was never a part of the Roman Empire, and but still we have very significant evidence for very close context to the Romans, and we see this from the beginning of the 1st century AD. There starts coming these Roman objects into the elite tombs in the Danish area. And especially from the 2nd and 3rd century, and in the years following the Marcomannic Wars, there is a very, very significant import of Roman objects, especially Roman, in the Danish region will be considered luxury items of bronzes and glass, and different other type of objects. The exact character of this contact between the Danish tribes and the Roman Empire is very much discussed, and I will not be able to give any clear answer, but it's apparent that there are a significant interaction with the Roman culture, and one of the features which emphasizes this is the finds of board games and game pieces in the elite tombs. So, when speaking of game pieces, and they are found in actually a rather significant number of tombs. Unfortunately, it's been a while since anybody have updated the count of these pieces of game pieces found in the Danish tomb. But in '95, there were found almost 500 glass game pieces in the tombs in Denmark from the Roman Iron Age, and they came from approximately around 22 different tombs. But since then, there's been actually quite a significant number of finds, especially from the Zealand and in the region. Well, maybe it's only about 20 to 30 kilometers region from Copenhagen. And I will give just a few examples of these tombs from here. One of them is this one, which is found in Ishøj, as I said, close to Copenhagen. And this tomb it is this one that was part of a rather big tomb area, a tomb necropolis. And this particular tomb was placed in the center and had presumably been covered by some kind of mound, and the other tombs that were less rich were found like in the area around it. So there's some evidence suggesting that this was a tomb of very big importance. In the tomb was found a male skeleton of a man around the age of 40 to 50. And in the tomb he had drinking equipment with Roman bronzes, and these Roman glass, so-called circus glass, that are found in some numbers in Denmark. And also he had these pieces of game pieces in glass. There were 29 black pieces, and there were 30 white. So seems. And even though there are no preserved no traces of a board, it is of course presumed that this this tomb originally was equipped with a board. This is also emphasized by the comparison with another tomb also excavated within the recent years. And this tomb was the tomb of a child, or a boy. He's suggested to be around 12 years old. As the other one, he had also with him this drinking equipment, some Roman glass, food, and then again black and white glass game pieces. Having like 29 black pieces again, and then 31 white or whitish. And then also in this tomb was found traces of wood and these. So I don't know what it's called in English. Corner pieces, metal and bronze, and 11 nails that has presumably have been used to fasten these bronze fittings on the wood. There were traces also of the wood, but it was in a very bad conditions. And also there were on the soil, the pattern of red and whitish squares could be seen, indicating that this had been a board where there has been painted a square pattern used for looking down. Yes, but the most significant find or evidence we have for the use of game boards in Denmark is the finds from Vimose. Vimose is a bog on the island called Fyn, and it was used presumably as a sacrificial bog, where there has been found quite a significant number of weapons. Roman weapons, but also Germanic type of weapons from the northern region and from other tribal areas of Europe, of Eastern Europe, and most of these weapons had been destroyed before they were deposited in the bog, where they were deposited often in like bundles that had been wrapped in strings or clothes or something, so they were thrown into the bog. And there are identified among 8 main deposits from the period around the 1st till the 7th century AD. Unfortunately, this material was excavated in the 1850s and 1860s, and we have during the time that it was excavated, there was no really good documentation of where the things were found and how the conditions. So when we come to the Vimose, the board games, we don't know exactly how they were found in relation to each other. So the find was first published in 1869 by Engelhardt, but they are currently being prepared for a new publication by Senior Paul Jensen that will presumably appear hopefully in a few years. So, and here's just some few examples of the weapon found in the tomb, in the bog, and here just another example. Yes, and in the bog was found, or is known today, 4 main fragments of wooden board games and some small ones that I will show, and then around 87 game pieces that were made of glass and amber and bone. There are 7 dices, 5 are like cubic dices, and 2 are these long stick. And then there were 2 cups like this one, and a box of wood that, even though I think it cannot be definitely proven that it was part of the gaming equipment, it is usually considered in this context as well. Yeah. And here is the publication from the 19th century and the drawings giving in this. Yeah. So, So what I did before coming here was that we did not have any recent photos at all of this material, and it is actually, some pieces are in the exhibition in the center of Copenhagen, and others are in storerooms outside Copenhagen. So I have not been able to look at this together, but I have tried to go through everything and also kind of clear out this, because it is always said that there are 4 fragments, but the 4th one is never really shown. So that's it's kind of been interesting to see what it actually was. So, and the first one here is the one that it is exhibited in today in the museum, and it is, as already been discussed, it is a board inserted into this frame that has some nice profile. You will see it later. And on one side we have this squares, and on the other, I don't know if it really shows for you, but it has these circles here, and we have the larger one in the center. Yeah. This fragment is not complete. It doesn't seem to be completely preserved, so it's difficult to say the exact count of how many squares were on this side of the table. Yeah, this is the frame looked from the side, where you can see these very nice circles incised as decoration on the side of the table. Yes, and then this one is recorded with the same inventory number as the one we just saw, but it is not on the same location. To me, I cannot see that they fit in any way, but it would have been interesting to see them together. Anyways, it has also these double circles, and then we can see also this wooden dowels that have been used to put together the boards, and they can be seen in many of these fragments. Yes, and this is the 4th fragment that is not shown in the 19th century publication. And this is actually, it's very long, it's 52 centimeters, 52.5 centimeters, and it has the full length of the board. The frames have been sitting here and here, which is very clear. And it has the number of 18 squares in this length. The other side, unfortunately, was at a very early time exhibited, glued onto some kind of board, and when it was removed, the backside kind of disappeared. As you can see, it's really rough now. But the descriptions in the old protocols when they were first entered the museum clearly describes that it had larger and smaller circles on this side. So in that, we can say that it was like the other ones had the squares and the circles on the other side. So. Then, yes, we have the other one, which is also well known from the publication. What we see here is this part, which is in our exhibition, but the other one, this part of the frame here, for some reason it's not in the exhibition but in the other location. So what you see here is what you can see today in the exhibition. So, and like the one we saw before, this is actually able to say that this is preserved in its full length. We have here, the frame would have been here and here. And also on this one we have the count of 18 squares. It is not as long as the one we just saw. This is only 47 centimeters. So I don't think they have been, well, depends on how it was. You don't probably. So, on this one you see these circles, and I think it should be emphasized here. I think this is also due to the way it has been exhibited at some point.
On it.
Yeah, exactly. So it should not be considered original. But again, we have here the circles, and on this one we can actually see that it has 6 circles, and then the larger one, in this case, it has double circle. Yeah, just a close-up of the circle on this piece. And this is the fragment joining the one that we just saw, but not today exhibited together. And here we have the decoration on this side of the board, very similar to the first piece that we saw. And again, you see very clearly that it has been put together using these wooden doubles. And here we see it from the side. Yes. And then we have this fragment that was also included in the publication, and it's I think it's not related to the other ones, and this is mainly because the frame was much rougher or different to the other ones. But again, we see the squares on one side, and on the other we have the circles. This, the larger circle here has this triangular decoration inside, which is different from the other ones that we saw. And then, as I said, the frame is different. The profile is more lower, or it is more significant profile than the other one. Yeah, just a close-up of this part. And then here you see again the holes that were used for collecting the fragments. Yeah, and then I found one in the storerooms also this one, which was turned into the museum at a much later time, from maybe, I think it was from a private farmer or something working in the area. And it did not come into the collection before the end of the 19th century, but this is clearly also a fragment of a frame for one of these game boards. Yeah, and I have only read what has been said about them, and the tables in Vimose are supposed to have these 18 × 18 squares. At least we can say that the ones that have a full length had 18 squares, but as I learned now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the other side is the same, so I don't know. And then of course we have, this is the reference to the square, the circular game used on the other side of the boards. The question if we are talking about 1, 2, or 3, or 4 different boards is really difficult to say. I think there are the one that's shown here is clearly different from the others, but if the others were originally part of the same game board, it's really difficult to say. And as I said in the beginning, we don't have any indication at all on how or where these pieces were found in connection with each other in the block, unfortunately. Yes, and just very briefly at the end, I just want to mention these because again, these are the golden horns of Calaboose in Denmark. They were found in like the very most southern part of Jutland, like almost on the border to Germany, and they were found. The first one, the long one, was found in 1630. So, it was very early. A young girl stumbled over it walking on the field, and then the other one was found in the 1730s, like more than 100 years later. So, and they were some of the most significant finds from Denmark. Unfortunately, they were robbed or stolen from in the beginning of the 19th century in 1802 by a Copenhagen jeweler who brought them home and melted them down. So the originals are lost. We don't have them. So what we see here is the reconstruction of them from the 19th century, and they are based on the drawings that were made of the originals. And the scenes shown on these horns are really, really difficult to interpret. It's really imaginative. It has elements showing centaurs and like references to the antique world, and it has references to the more local religions. But it has also, and that's why I brought it here, it has this decoration here, and it's really interesting, I think. And it has, of course, been suggested that this is a board game, while others might think that it has some relation instead to this very funny features shown here. So, but I don't know if anybody has any reference materials for this. It could be a board game. Let's see. Yes, and that's all I have.
Thank you for this rich presentation, beginning with what, if I'm not mistaken, was the royal game of Ur, and ending with this fine example of golden horse. And I think that we can open the discussion now. If there are any questions.
I would like to. I cannot swear to work. But the three Greek game boards are the only known in Greek world. Are the only three known on other others.
Well,
Terracotta.
Le tre tavolette greche sono le sole conosciute, cinque from the same period,
Yes.
60th century,
around 600.
Six, yes, and
Late 7th, early 6th.
and are whole hectic, whole for Athens.
Yeah.
So we could think that is an attic game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't know the context of the boreal context.
Kerameikos, yes.
Yes.
Vari also.
Yes, and sometimes it is in the tomb, and sometimes it is outside the tomb, as in, I think,
outside the tomb.
It is the offering.
Offering in French.
That's why it is so broken.
But that were female tombs or children's tombs?
No, not children's tombs.
Not children's tombs. So, and if I understood, do you think that till the half of the 6th century, we have the real tablet, and then the representations on vases. Why?
Yeah, this is
A good question. No, because
the game continued to be played. The game lived on even later.
yes.
So it is not a question of the game that disappeared.
It's not
it
a
was
question
not
of
played.
that
No. It was played.
Because we are used to think that everything in a boreal context have a significant, a sign. And so the scholars read the Achille and Ajax vases, like the meeting and the meeting of the two heroes in the Holte tombs. The scene is not linked to the game. It's linked to a sovrastructure, una sovrastruttura ideologica, and so I don't understand why we have before the real tablet and then the represent. Maybe the two things are not linked. Maybe. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So to speak for what is just told, you have at the same time the witness of Alcaeus, the lyric poet Alcaeus, who speaks about this holy line, and this is just the same time with these first archaeological founds. This goal, also Theocritus in the Hellenistic times speaks about the Hierogramida. So
yes, looking at the Copenhagen board again made me think of the paper. We have already a first special issue out in Kentron. It was the first re-meeting by Maya Pomader, who examined Bronze Age material, and it is online, her paper is online. And she has a chapter, short chapter, about identifying alien material. And we just discussed it the other day. A very interesting proposal is to identify shells as elements for play. Shells, the conus shells. And when I look at the Copenhagen game, I think these are shells, the same shape. Can you go back to it? Very elongated. And she mentions several publications. Some are found in tools, in tools of children. One can imagine children playing with these shells and as counters. And she says that some are worked so that they are really nicely flat. It could be that. Could be shells. And in some of the publications, some shells are painted. So, and maybe we should change the animation. Just, or you have round counters in the 6th century, but if these are the shells that we find in tombs, possibly associated with play, and we discussed it with Barbara, and the question is, well, if this is possible, but do we have an evidence? Maybe the evidence is here.
There are shells in Etruscan graves, in Bologna and Spina, sometimes also together with counters and dice.
What about this period? Do you have round counters of this period? So maybe we should change. We should change the animation. Because it could be. That's it. Because it always struck me this shape. I was wondering why are they like this? We send you the reference.
The Vimose, these are deposits.
Yes.
These are clearly deposited material.
Yeah, and as I said, of course I don't know exactly specifically for the board games, but the deposits were usually assembled like in kind of like a bundle, like with the strings and clothes attached around it, and then thrown into the bundle. Yeah. But as I said, unfortunately, we have very brief descriptions on how it was actually found.
The counters have been found together with the boards.
The counters?
Pieces.
Yeah.
Dice and everything.
Yeah. Well, we don't know exactly. No. It's so badly described from the excavations of the material because it was in the 1800s.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because the counters are, let's say, unusual, I'd say. They don't look like Roman counters.
No.
The boards clearly have Roman games on it, but the counters...
Yeah. Yes, we have this amber.
Amber counters, of course.
And it also seems a little bit different from what is in the tombs, where it's usually these glass, which is clearly Roman and not local. Yeah.
It is very interesting to have these amber pieces. So of course you are near where amber is found, but you must know that there is an amber dye. Where was it found? In England.
Yes.
In England. And there is a paper about this amber dye. So it could also be an exotic gaming device, just because the paper is about its possible magic. Because amber is electric, and so throwing an amber dice could provide luck. Because it's amber. But when I see that, I think maybe it has also to do with exotic material, with trade. It's not just that level. And another point is for Thomas, it's of course this box. Is it a fritillus to throw down? As it is, as you show it in the exhibition, that it could be a round box for throwing dice or fritillus. This is a quite mysterious object because until now it is difficult to find them in context. We suspect this or this, and there are many shapes, many possible shapes. So this one again is a possibility. But this is how you show it in the museum.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And what is intriguing are these long dice, the stick dice, because they come from the Orient. They can come from India or from Egypt, or something like this. They are usually not used in Rome, in the Roman Empire. Sometimes you find them. There's one, I think, in Antiochia, but this is exotic material there. So the Romans used cubic dice. They are Germanic long dice, but they are not as long as this. They are rectangular, but they are not stick dice. But this is really an intriguing object that come from far away. Really very, very far away.
I don't. They're better shown here, I think. Yeah.
And here too we have a paper impress of Thierry de Police about the possible Indian origin.
Coptic dice and Indian dice.
And
they are very interesting. This is quite an interesting assemblage of different material from different provenance.
Now, I didn't take pictures of all the pieces, so we can provide that. Because I don't think, you know, the bone ones are really flat.
Chips.
Yes.
These might be Roman, so they are typical for Roman contexts.
Okay.
I know, and then this unequal number of pieces, 29 and 30, something.
Yeah, that's really strange.
This is you'll find it relatively often.
Okay.
There are different instances where you have this unequal numbers. Sometimes just one piece less than the other side.
Yeah, but that's the same in both of the tombs. Yeah. So what would be the normal number of the pieces to play with?
This is a difficult question because when you the normal, I think that doesn't exist, the normal number, because when you have let's say a grid, you have in Neuna you have 13 squares, in Vimosi you have 18, in Pokrat you have 17 by 15, so you will surely adapt the number of pieces to the size of the board, to the number of squares. So the normal or standard, I don't think that it existed. The question is, why should there be 30 in one side and 29 on the other side? And did they deliberately put one, leave one? I suggested in one of my papers, I suggested that this could be a kind of interpreted in the same way as the deliberate destruction of objects in graves, of weapons, for example. So you put one counter away, and so that you cannot play the game. But it's really great to see these new photographs of the Vimosi materials. Xenia Pauli Jensen, she wrote to me that she is mainly dealing with the weapons.
Exactly.
Is there somebody actually working on the gaming material?
No, not at all. I think Xenia is the last one who looked at this material, but again, as you said, she's mainly interested in the weapon part.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if anyone working on that. So.
Because it would really be great to have a new publication, because what you find actually are just the drawings in the publication of
Engelhardt.
Engelhardt, and then Greek. There's another small publication by Greek where 4 pieces are shown. So this would merit a new proper publication.
This regular shape of the long piece, is that normal that they were kind of like put together from these, because I was wondering the shape of it. Here. No. But it has this, is this the way it was originally, or could it have been, what do you think? I guess it must have been part of the middle of the table, maybe?
Could be.
Yeah, but was it normal to make them of these pieces, or is it not?
Which pieces?
Like if the board was kind of put together from pieces of wood that would be regular like this, and then
several stripes.
Yes,
not
exactly.
one, not just one.
Okay. Or is it maybe made like this at some later point, or is it? Do you think is it?
That's a good question. I don't know. But it seems to be not broken, but.
Yeah, I think so. It doesn't seem broken, but and it's really.
On one side,
But when I saw it, I was just wondering if this was the original way it was put together, or if it was.
Normally, these boards are, as far as we know, these boards are made of one piece. And then inserted into the frame.
So maybe it could have been used later for another purpose, I think, maybe, or I don't know.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Oh, there are a lot of questions.
We go on, but with coffee and biscuits. Thank you.
Wonderful.
So what about the diaries?